fans of Who Killed Julie. This is Paul Sading, the creator of Who Killed Julie. We would love to make the follow-on story to Who Killed Julie, but we can't do it without your help. Head on over to patreon.com/Paul Sading. Check out the rewards and the levels to see what you could contribute monthly to the creation of the show and all the audio fiction that I do create. There's a level for everyone there, and I believe in giving as much as I can to the audio drama community. I wanted to celebrate the end of this series with a special episode. A number of you absolutely and rightfully love Ashley Litzy's voice, the actor who plays Emerald Johnson. In 2017, exclusive only for my patrons, Ashley narrated one of my favorite short stories that I wrote called May's Flowers. Make sure that you have a box of tissue nearby. This story is an example of the types of exclusive content that my patrons get month after month, even during the off seasons. So, if you enjoy this, if you enjoy Who Killed Julie, if you do want to see the next series in this story, make sure you become a patron today. Support the show. We can reach that goal and we can get to work. Enjoy May's Flowers.
Who is May? May is the woman with the flowers. May is also the woman who almost died, except that she did die. Well, sort of. May's almost death rocked the small community of Ember Lake, Washington. An almost death has a strange ring to it, I know. So let me take you back to 1929 and give you the full story. May wasn't born in 1929. No, she was born in 1930. But you have to go back 10 months earlier to understand everything that brought us to May's recent, almost, death. 1929 was the year of Al Capone's St. Valentine's Day Massacre, the year the Vatican gained its independence from Italy, and it's also the year of the first car radio. But none of those things compared to what came later in the year. In October of 1929, the stock market crashed, kicking off the Great Depression. 1 in 5 Americans were unemployed, and in a world that did not yet accept women into the workforce, that meant a lot of families were desolate and desperate. May's family was one of the unlucky ones. Roger Jones, May's father, was a steel worker in Pennsylvania. In 1929, he suddenly found himself needing to find work when the steel plant couldn't pay its employees. Every day, he would head out, dressed in his best clothes, to stand in the bread line for any sustenance he could get his hands on, before hitting the streets, shelving his pride to beg and plead to be hired by anyone who had the heart to listen and the money to give. Some days, he got lucky and was hired for a few days, doing the dirtiest, grimiest jobs an employer had for him. He hated the work, but he liked it more than the long periods of nothing in between. He hated being a charity case, but a charity case he was. A lot of people were during those dark times. There was a lot of fighting in the Jones household when May's father was out of work. A lot of stress, too. But the Joneses did what desperate families always did. They kept plugging along, because plugging along was the only way you survived. But some days, they did more than survive. Some days were good days. Roger would get extra work, or a compassionate, God-fearing man who would tip him a few extra dollars for a job well done. Roger would come home to Wilhelmina, his wife, in high spirits, of the man-made kind. No, on these nights, it wasn't God moving inside Roger. It was black market liquor, the best he could find for the few extra dollars he'd been paid. When he was in these moods, Wilhelmina would breathe deeply and patiently. Roger's behaviors would regress to those of a teenage boy when he was drunk, meaning she would spend part of her night entertaining his more basic desires. It was during one of these nights that May was conceived. One of the things you might like to know about May was that she was brought into the world in poverty and almost died as the richest woman in Ember Lake. May Jones lived most of her life as May Webster. She was a pediatrician during her working years and the town's informal medical advisor in her retirement. May never truly retired, just as she truly never died. And the townspeople of Ember Lake loved her for her selfless and continuous service long before her almost death. That wasn't always the case. May married Tom after her father died, and Tom moved her to Ember Lake when his job took him to Washington in 1957. Moving to the West Coast shattered May's world. Being Black in America in the early to mid-20th century was a difficult, often miserable experience. Back east, in the big city, her family's racial makeup was cause for long side glances and the occasional pointed fingers and hurtful comments. But none of those times compared to the outright racism and exclusion she and Tom experienced in Ember Lake. May learned very quickly that there was a divide between America's progressive cities and the small towns that dotted its countryside. Now, in fairness to Ember Lake, it is a different town than it was in 1957. Most of Washington is. Well, at least the parts west of the Cascade Mountains. But back then, a white man bringing his Black wife into town drew more than the rude gestures she'd suffered in Pennsylvania. Tom bought them a small house on the edge of town, which soon became her entire world. A biracial couple couldn't hope for company, for visitors. There was no one to welcome them to town with a dry cake and warm handshake and maybe a Christian hug. May spent most of their first year in Ember Lake alone, busying herself with necessary household chores. Her days brightened when Tom would come home from work and she bombarded him with questions about his day. He was a patient man, but that didn't stop him from urging her to open her practice. After all, why have a college degree if you weren't going to put it to use? She resisted the temptation to follow his encouragement, doubting herself any time she thought she could do it, until, months later, the monotony of daily silence broke her. Against her better judgment May opened her practice in their spare room and waited. And waited. And waited. At first, she thought it was because the house was located on the outskirts of town. Too far out, she would tell Tom. When autumn rolled off the Pacific and chilled the air, May blamed her lack of patience on the weather. But as the weeks passed, the distasteful truth couldn't be avoided. She was the pariah of Ember Lake. May forced herself to recognize she was a black woman long before she was a doctor in the eyes of her neighbors. To his credit, Tom supported her. He was there for her on those long nights when she cried as they ate dinner. And he was there still when she became a quiet recluse. He puttered around the kitchen, cleaning up while she gathered herself. "You don't need to," May touched his hand, encouraging him to put the dirty plate back in the sink. "Well, I ate dinner too," Tom answered. "Yes." She smiled a smile that failed. "You did. But you worked too. And I didn't." And then the tears came. And Tom did what Tom always did. He wrapped her in his thick arms and held her until she didn't want to be held anymore. As far as May was concerned, there was no better place to be in the entire world. Nothing improved. Not for weeks. No patience. No one with a severe cold who would take a risk seeing her, even if only out of desperation. It got bad. She got desperate. Though she was a strong woman, there was only so much rejection a person could tolerate. May and Tom actually began having conversations about moving back east. But in the 1950s, people just didn't do that. No, they homesteaded and worked and found another job in the area when your job went away. That's what you did. You stayed. And you fought. Even until her almost death, May remembered the day she decided to fight. Hank & Sons Grocery was the only grocery store in Ember Lake back then. The entire town shopped there, so much that the store served a dual purpose as a social venue. In towns like Ember Lake, there were few options when it came to socializing with your fellow human. There were no corporate chain coffee shops, and McDonald's had only started its empire 2 years earlier and hadn't yet extended its reach to this part of the world. No, if you wanted to socialize, you attended church, you ate at one of the 2 diners in town, or you went to Hank & Sons Grocery. On a brutal November morning, May drove to the store and hurried through the aisles, gathering what she needed to start dinner. Since she still had no patience, she had plenty of time to plan and prepare meals for her and Tom. And she was almost done with her shopping, checking out, in fact, when it happened. Wonder what that's about. Jennifer Watkins indicated a mute commotion with a nod towards the back of the store. May shrugged, glancing back down the aisle and seeing nothing, but then jumped at the sudden sound of glass shattering. "Damn it," Jennifer muttered before giving May a dark look. "Don't you run off with none of these groceries." Jennifer labored past the neighboring cashier line. which was currently full of boxes of goods the stock boys had yet to put up, and made her way down the aisle toward the noise. "You kids better not be messing about again." May thumped her finger on her purse while she watched the cashier waddle away. How dared this woman she'd dealt with 1,000 times before today even think she would entertain the idea of stealing groceries? Just who did she think she was? Just wait until she comes back up. May's thought was cut off by a shout from the back of the store. The shout had come from Jennifer the cashier. "Someone help!" Without thinking, May threw her purse into her cart, shoving it out of the way, and carefully ran, she was in heels after all, the length of the aisle. When she reached the end, she came upon an elderly man lying on the floor. His hand rested on his chest and was just now loosening its grip on the thick jacket he wore. He was unconscious. "What happened?" May asked the few patrons standing around, including the elderly lady kneeling beside the man. Jennifer the cashier simply stood there, doing nothing. He fell." The kneeling woman struggled through tears. "Did he say anything?" May leaned closer, trying to listen to the man's breathing. "Don't pester them," Jennifer snapped at her, turning to the gathered throng. "Someone please call a doctor. There's a phone up front. Tell them I am a doctor," May said, with a strength she hadn't felt in a long, long time. "You," she pointed at Jennifer the cashier, "go find me something comforting, something soft. Jackets, they'll work." "Why?" Jennifer wrung her hands. "What? Stop talking and start moving," May said, calmly, her eyes never leaving the man while she questioned the woman who knelt beside him. "What's his name?" "Harold," the elderly woman said weakly. "He's my husband." "Harold, my name is May, and I'm going to help you." And she did. That day changed not only Harold's life, which she saved, but her own as well. No longer was May viewed as that black woman in town. Suddenly, she was Dr. Webster. And in her time as the only medical professional in Ember Lake, she delivered over 800 babies, an impressive number for such a small town, saw tens of thousands of patients, she lost count after a few years, and even resuscitated 13 children and a few elderly people. May started her career in Ember Lake as a pariah and ended it as a staple of the community. She was a trusted source of medical advice and a confidant and friend to many of the women in town, who would tell her harrowing tales of neglect and abuse that the world wasn't ready to deal with. May was loved by all because she shed the remnants left by the town's original fear, hatred, and bigotry. And she gave. She gave constantly, and she gave all of herself. And finally, her sacrifices were being recognized. Even when she started to earn a very respectable living from her practice, May gave to the town, funding food drives and scholarships for school children who dreamt of attending college but couldn't afford it. When the Sadowskis lost everything in a fire, May and Tom bought thousands of dollars worth of food, clothes, and even furniture when the family moved into their new home. She did all this while living a modest life in the same home they moved into way back in 1957. Their new financial status never changed May. Never. Fate, or maybe God, has a strange way of writing a person's story. Someone like May, who gave so much and asked for so little, should have been rewarded in life. One to never demand anything of God, May did need something she didn't have to make her life complete. And that was to one day be a mother. Day in and day out, she cared for other people's children, only to close up the office in the evening and go home to the house with the spare room that stood watch, waiting for the day when a little one would fill it with happiness and joy. That day finally came in the summer of 1969. Women May's age weren't supposed to have babies at 40. May knew that. She knew the risks. But this was something she wanted. Something she needed. And so the risks were worth it for her and Tom, who was much more worried than she was. And on that hot August day, they welcomed Felicia Margaret Webster into the world. The little girl completed the blessing May desired. Everything that happened in her life, no matter how dark it appeared to someone on the outside, was a blessing. Even in the early days in Ember Lake, when everyone seemed to dislike her, hate her, for things she couldn't control, even those early times made the experiences that followed that much more rewarding. But Felicia changed the world in a way May didn't think was possible. She wasn't oblivious. She spent her entire career around patients and their children and saw firsthand the pain and heartbreak, joy and elation parents experience through the lives of their children. No, not oblivious. She just didn't know until she actually lived through it herself. And Felicia's arrival into the world taught her those deeper lessons she'd only been an observer of for years. May learned what true, unconditional love was. She understood what it meant to sacrifice on a level only another parent could understand. And she learned what it meant to hurt. For, you see, Felicia's little life was short. Too short. In the winter of 1969, tiny, vulnerable Felicia caught pneumonia and was taken before she shared her first step, before her first word. May's greatest pain, her greatest regret, was that she never got to hear Felicia say mama before God took his little angel home. And still, May pressed on. The ladies' group from church stopped by every day, at least the days she'd allow them to, usually one at a time. But they came as an entire group the day she opened her practice again. Honey, take your time, Jill chided softly, a compassionate hand holding May's. You don't need to open. We have Dr. Reynolds over in Olympia. We can go see him for anything urgent. You don't need to do this. But I do, May answered. I do need to do this. She needed to do it for more reasons than anyone in town would ever understand. She needed the routine to help her deal with a broken heart. She needed to be around happy families to help her avoid questioning why God would break apart her own. No, they would never understand. She never wanted them to be able to understand. She didn't want them to know how selfish she was being. And so, things returned to normal after a time. Almost. May and Tom never had another child. They never tried. It was too much. It was too late. By the time either of them could move forward with their lives, May had passed the threshold of risk for a woman to carry a child. And there was no way, absolutely no way, she was going to take that risk. There was no way she was going to put herself through that again. It was the only time in her life that she was okay with being selfish. She started closing the office for a day. Just one day. Every single year. So she could go lay flowers at her daughter's grave. May would buy a bouquet of Gerber daisies from Wilbur Davis's wife, Jenny. She had a very successful, yet unofficial, florist business for years. And she would walk the 2 miles to Ember Lake Cemetery and lay them at Felicia's grave. Every year she made this trek on the anniversary of Felicia rejoining the Lord. No matter what the weather was like, no matter what the roads were like. Everyone understood why she needed to close her office. No one begrudged her that. For years after Felicia's death, May was strengthened by the support of the community. They even talked her into renaming the annual scholarship the Websters had created for other children. At first, May resisted and only gave in when the community persisted and Tom came around to agreeing with them. It was to honor and remember Felicia, but it was still a difficult thing for May to do. It felt wrong. After many conversations and a few hundred tears, she finally agreed. And the Felicia Webster Hope Scholarship was born. The community celebrated the milestone as if it was their own daughter, and their reaction nearly broke May. She didn't like people making a big deal about her or her family. "No fussing now," she always said whenever she felt uncomfortable at another celebration over her and her own. She'd never experienced it before, and it never felt truly right. But, as God is prone to do, He led her down a path He wanted her to be on. And Felicia's death inspired May to do more for community, for others, for the children. More scholarships, more donations, more office hours, many of which she never got paid for. Tom began leading the boys' Bible study group, and May took the helm of the girls' group. She realized God didn't take Felicia away to make her suffer an empty life. He brought that little angel home so May could focus on enriching more lives than she possibly would have been able to do if her own daughter had survived that bout of pneumonia all those years ago. He took Felicia home so May could do his work here. "30 years after Felicia joined the Lord, Tom followed her. May was there with him, just like she was with their daughter, holding his hand when the man she'd loved for nearly 50 years passed. She didn't have any blood family to help her with the arrangements. You see, any family she had was still on the East Coast. But May didn't need them. Tom passed in late 1999, and the world was a much different place than when they first moved to town all those years ago. Hundreds of people tried to help. but the women's group from church acted as effective guardians, restricting access to May so she wasn't overwhelmed and was able to mourn properly. The thing was, though, May didn't need to mourn. Tom was older than her and had died at 80. He'd had a wonderful, fulfilling life where he helped thousands of people in and around Ember Lake. And now, he was with Felicia. May was content each year when she bought just the 12 Gerber daisies. May's flowers, Florist Jenny began calling them. Money was tight now, of course, and she had to split the bouquet between the 2 side-by-side grave markers. She knew Tom wouldn't mind. He'd probably fuss over her buying flowers anyways. And so she continued to live and give. Years longer than anyone expected, May continued to teach at the church and even started an outreach organization for underprivileged children in Ember Lake and its surrounding communities. She'd always wanted to do something more, but her and Tom were always so busy. Now, with him gone, she had the time to help those she'd not been able to previously. There was so much ignorance in the world that directly affected the health of young, poor women, and, though she was a God-fearing woman, she wasn't scientifically illiterate. May knew these women needed access to health care and sex education and resources. The world had failed them for too long, and she was determined to change that in this small corner before the Lord called on her. "I don't know how you do it," Amy Herman said. She was the new leader of the women's church group ever since Jill passed away 6 years ago. "I know it's not polite, Miss May, but you're not a young flower anymore. It's okay to slow down." May smiled, something she rarely did ever since her dental issues resulted in the loss of some of her teeth. Not because she was embarrassed or couldn't afford proper dental care, but because she didn't want to make others uncomfortable. That money would do better for the world than it would in her mouth, she would say. "Child, if I stop moving, I stop growing. And that's the day I die. Best not hope you're trying to get rid of me already." And May didn't stop working. And no one tried to stop her either. They knew better. Through the rough years of the Bush administration, she didn't like that guy, even though he said he was a Christian. May grew her nonprofit and expanded her scholarship to include more schools and more children than just those attending Ember Lake High School. She kept working right up until the day she almost died. The day she almost died was the day she went to buy her flowers again. The flowers she bought every year on this day. The flowers she planted at Tom and Felicia's resting place. Though, in the winter of 2016, May didn't make it to the cemetery. Peter Tomlinson was a young kid, 18 and full of piss and vinegar. A kid who lived his young life hard, drinking and drugging and losing sight of the promise of life. He liked to drive as fast as he liked to live. May had come across him in her work around town. He was a kid she'd never given up on, even when most of the community had. It was this most recent anniversary day that May bought her flowers and changed Peter Tomlinson's fledgling life. For it was that day, on Baker Street, where May couldn't cross the street quite as quickly as she had in the past. Her hips wouldn't unhitch like they did in her earlier days. The street was still covered in a light coating of fresh snow, just enough to make them slick. It was this day that Peter Tomlinson decided to drive too fast through town so he could get to Sarah Whitaker's house for another round of unprotected sex that would surely ruin both their young lives. He didn't see May, or if he had, he was too distracted or too stupid to react. May never saw him as he plowed his aged car into her, right there, right in the middle of Baker Street. May's bouquet flew through the air, the flower slowly drifting down as she lay there in a pool of dark blood that turned the snow-coated street red. Witnesses to the accident, the ones calling 911 and hoping the volunteer fire department EMTs would show up soon, all swore that the last Gerber daisy petal floated more slowly than the rest, as if it refused to give up flight. They would attest that it lingered in the air, almost still, defying the gravitational forces of nature, challenging those very forces to overcome it. They would swear, as one, that the last petal came to rest when it finally decided to give up the fight right over May's heart. The EMTs arrived 15 minutes later. By then, May had already joined her Lord and was finally reunited with her lifelong love and her daughter. May had gone home. But May never left Ember Lake. Not truly. You see, the beauty of May's life was not just that she lived it, but that she left something behind to enrich the lives of others. In a world of segregation, separation, hatred, and isolationism from those who are different, May rose above and joined people, enriched people, healed people. Everyone who met May was changed by what she did during her life, as were thousands who never had the pleasure of meeting the old black woman who lived on the edge of town, Dr. Webster. One tiny life, embodied in one extraordinary heart, changed the world for the people of Ember Lake. Life is a cycle with a distinct beginning and a distinct end. But there are things some people do that transcend irrevocable markers. For May never truly left Ember Lake. Each time a baby is born to parents who were themselves patients of May, each time a child wins the Felicia Webster Hope Scholarship and sets out on their path, each time a poor woman receives critical health care that saves her life, May lives on. Now, to the residents of Ember Lake, May Webster will never truly die.